Hey, hey, this is Taz Street, everybody with Positive Out Loud. Today I have a very interesting guest. I have Timothy Brainard. And what I loved about him was when I saw him online is that he's very unique and he's very eclectic. So, when I looked at his website, I want to do this from your website, Timothy, and talk about the things that you love. So, what he says is that he's a hammock lover, and I'm a hammock lover too. I love hammocks. A practical innovator, an incidental comedian, which I can't wait to get into that as we talk, a ukulele enthusiast. That's awesome. I'm a musician as well. I love to play the drums. A life scientist, a magician, and so much more. And what I also saw is that you have a system called the whole human system, and we'll get into that later too, as we discuss, have this conversation about life and love and all that in between. Yeah. So I think where I want to start here today, Timothy, and for everybody out there is your journey. Is like, where did you come from? What was life like before you became more aware of who you really are? And, because I want people to see some of the challenges and some of the things that you went through before where you are now and how you're feeling now. So.
Okay. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. And yes, we'll have some fun connecting on those silly little titles that I presented on my website. So I'm glad you brought those up. Man, to ask about the journey, I'm fairly confident that you could relate with this, but it is possible in life to squeeze a whole lot of living into a relatively small period of time. I'm almost 31. So I'm a young guy, and yet in the space of my adult experience, the journey has been far too vast to encapsulate into any single conversation. So I'm going to do my best.
Of course, right.
To summarize and to give you kind of a sense for the flow of how everything has come together. And at any point, if I'm monologuing for too long, don't hesitate to, elbow me in the ribs, break in. and any questions that come up too, I'd love to address those. But to begin with, it all from childhood, really, my life experience growing up until maybe 14, 15, 16 years old was squeaky clean. That's how it was for me, squeaky clean. I was raised in a very conservative setting, and as a result of that, there was this. I guess this obedience, this air of perfection, of just doing things right, that was more or less trained into me. And I filled that role extremely well. I was that guy who had straight A pluses, always the highest score in my class, the most gold stars on the chart, this sort of a thing. And so I was good at achieving, and I was good at looking clean.
So is this something that you wanted, was this something where you had the desire to please your parents?
Sure, of course, yes. Please my parents, please any of the authorities in my experience. This, in many ways, this is not only what allowed me to feel safe and secure within the context of those relationships, but also this was something that I had deeply connected my own identity to. Now, of course, none of this was even a choice. When we are raised in settings like this, these stories are written into the very structure of our nervous system, written into our bodies in some very deep ways. And so I was really just living out the stories that had been more or less programmed into me. And that is not in any way to judge the quality of those stories. It was just the story that I lived inside of. But at a certain point, I began to grow a little older. Now I'm in my late teens, and you start to ask certain questions and become aware of things that you weren't aware of previously. And I just happened to ask, all the wrong questions. And, all the wrong questions. I'm putting that in quotation marks here. The setting I was raised in was, in addition to being very conservative and structured, it was also very religious. And I think it was always understood that I would just kind of grow up and slot right into this future as Pastor Tim. And it made a lot of sense within that context and within the context of the kind of the facade that I was able to manage in that context. That was the direction. But as I began to ask certain questions and question the very basis of everything that I had been led to believe my whole life, a lot of that began to kind of crumble.
What are some of the things that you were believing when you were younger?
Well, the belief set was Christian. So the entire ideology and the worldview was built on like a non-denominational Christian perspective. I was raised in my first 14 years of living in a very, very kind of restrictive environment, like a more rigid kind of belief set that you can think of on the Christian side of the spectrum. So, you know, I would even as a little kid, I was dressing up in like a full suit with a tie and taking notes for every single message and going to church 3-4 times a week. It was a very large part of my experience growing up. And so to be stepping in any way outside of those very familiar constraints was a very uncomfortable thing for everyone in my experience. You know, I am the oldest of 4 boys. And it was unsettling. I know that it was unsettling for my family when I began to question certain things. And at first, I believe it was, you know, maybe it was the question of tithing 10% of my income to the church, basically giving back 10% of what I made to the church. And so I began to study. You know, this is something that was also kind of trained into me, was this capacity to dig deep and to research and to study. And so I began to study this particular subject, and it led to questions about the church itself and about the modern expression of the church as an organized system of religion. And then from there, it just began to kind of splinter out, because what I found through my personal studies, which went very deep, I began to find that certain expressions of Christianity that are easily accepted in this modern world may not necessarily vibe or align with the original essence of the message. Now, I want to be clear that you're going to have listeners who deeply and personally identify with the Christian message, and I am in no way criticizing that message. What I know for myself is that I did not appreciate the misalignment between the mainstream expression of this religion and the gold that existed at its core, the true essence of it. And the deeper that I studied, the more of a disconnect that I saw there. And that really fractured something in me. It basically took everything that I thought that I knew, everything that had been taught to me in my entire life leading up to this point. At this point, maybe I'm 18 or 19. And it just began to fracture. And so I ended up quite literally studying myself out of Christianity. I mean, there was a period of time where at any given point, you could find Tim with his backpack, and in that backpack would be 7, 8, or 9 different translations of the Bible, including original translations. So Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic. I mean, I was in deep. I spent 1 full year studying the concept of hell alone.
Wow.
That's how deep we're talking.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So this process for me,
that's where you are, the life scientist. I get that now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. In so many ways, that did transition into what I am pointing at when I say life scientist. Yes. Thank you. I guess what happened for me is that, you know, this was not the sort of thing that I took lightly. Somewhere inside, I knew that the quality of my beliefs, the content of my beliefs had some very powerful impact on the quality of my experience, on the world that I inhabited. And so it became very important for me to find the truth. This was the hunt, was to find the truth and to find myself in some relation to that truth, you know? And so I moved on from this study of the religion that I had been raised inside of to studying literally any religion I could get my hands on. And I have deeply studied, and actually become actively involved in every religion that I've ever met. At this time, it was very important for me to do that. And I studied all sorts of crazy stuff, all the way down to like witchcraft and Scientology, which from the perspective that I had been raised in was just far afield of anything acceptable.
Right, right.
But it was important for me. And it was important for me because what it was allowing for was two things. First of all, it was allowing this very, very focused perspective to soften and to expand. And so I was able to take in a lot of new information. I was also taking in this information by virtue of my own initiative. It wasn't being given to me. It was something I was after. It was something that I was exploring and discovering for myself. So the quality there had completely changed. And then the other side of this is that I was finding that within each of these different philosophies and belief sets was a rather consistent thread of information. I often refer to it as this golden thread of information. And I often found this golden thread to be most evident within the mystical traditions of any belief set. So, you know, you're studying Islam and then you find your way to Sufism and there's something there. Or you're studying Christianity and you find your way to even like Gnosticism and there's something there. You're studying Judaism and you find your way to Kabbalism and there's something there. And so there's inside of these mainstream belief sets, there's these mystical chords that are always pointing to something very valuable to me. And I had to follow those threads. And it was many years of following those threads. So
before we move on, where when you decided that you just didn't want to follow that path anymore of Christianity, how did that, I mean, since I would have imagined your family was very involved in that, how did that affect them? And you?
Poorly.
Mm-hmm.
It affected everyone poorly. You know, I was the firstborn, so in so many ways I was the experiment child, and I did not make it easy on my parents. You know, it's not like they got a field manual for how to raise, you know, a very aware individual. They didn't, and so there was a lot of discord for a period of time, and so much of this process at the time was being engaged in at their home. I still lived at home with my family, you know, and so there's a lot of stories around that it basically equaled out to the relationship there was more or less shattered as a result of my own explorations, of my own need to understand life and myself. Thankfully, there's a happy end to this story, but at the time it was quite miserable, and I certainly felt very, very alone. No part of it was easy, and yet something inside of me would not allow me to stop. You know, I just knew there was some deep inner knowing that I had to continue in this direction. I didn't know what was at the other end. It's not as if I had something I was aiming for. It's just that I had this orientation, so to speak, within me that was pulling me constantly forward. And regardless of how uncomfortable, terrifying, distressing that ended up being in the moment, it always meant something greater in retrospect.
Well, the mystery and the unknown is always uncomfortable, right? But the rewards are incredible.
Absolutely.
The further you go down that rabbit hole, yeah.
There's a reason that they refer to this rabbit hole. I love that, by the way. They refer to it as the hero's journey. And in your case, the heroine's journey. The point is that we're constantly going deeper into this territory that is so alien to us, but not everyone does it. The fact is, once you leave the village and the security and the comfort of the village, you're stepping into the wilderness. And that wilderness is not only unknown territory, but it's just rampant with monsters. I mean, all sorts of monsters and demons that we have never met, challenges and obstacles, lessons that we had never met, didn't know existed, never expected to have to meet. And now here we are alone facing them down. So the metaphorical quality of this, I think, is really relevant. It's always something that I've personally connected very strongly to.
See, I've noticed that the further I go, and I've done a lot of work this last couple of years, especially, that even the dreams are very difficult. Some of the dreams that I've encountered are very, very scary. But to face that and to be with that and to love it no matter what is I can't even explain it. It's just very mystical to me and life-changing. But you're right. Things will come up where it's like, gosh, how can I even face this on my own? But as you know, when we dream, we are by ourselves.
Yes. Yes. What I really like about what you just said is that you mentioned something about even loving that whole experience. You know, it's really tough to do at first. And actually, I think that, excuse me, that falling in love with this process, regardless of its discord, you know, regardless of how challenging it can be, to fall in love with the process is actually rather advanced. That's something that took me many years to come to, is an understanding of how much we get to savor the process as such. You know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'm glad that you pointed at that. It's huge.
Yeah. So the great thing is that you have a good relationship with your family now, of course, right? But that took a while, right? So how did that all kind of come back together for you with the relationships? Did you just keep working on them with, you know, different parts of your family, or how did that work?
You know, we were always close, even in the hard times. We were always very close, and it was never a question of whether or not I loved them or they loved me. You know, at the time, I just didn't think they liked me very much. And that was somehow worse, you know? It's like, well, I know they love me, but I just really don't think they like me. And so that was really tough. And for many years, it was a question of mostly separation. I mean, eventually I did end up having to leave my family home, and I had to kind of strike out on my own, not only metaphorically, but also physically, in order to come into myself in a new way. And I guess the incidental result of that is that it provided enough space to allow for a little bit of a reset in terms of that relationship. You know, it's one thing for Timothy to be sneaking, you know, a bunch of books that my parents don't love into the house and hiding them under my bed. It's another thing for me to be, you know, in my own home and living my own life while they continue forward with their own life. So that played a part. But there's also
it's funny. I could see you sneaking like all these spiritual books and like, who would even be sneaking that into somebody's house? I mean, that's a good thing, I think.
Yes, it's so funny. I always used to get so confused about that. I'm like, everyone else my age is out there, you know, doing drugs, and here I am, like, reading books about religion. Like, it felt so unfair, you know, that it would be a problem at all. You know, but it also spoke to the very thing that I was tapping into, which was the extreme power that is contained within the quality of our beliefs themselves, the level of impact that they hold. And for my parents, they had found their way to a set of beliefs that were extremely impactful and benefiting them. So for me to be at odds with that spoke all sorts of uncomfortable stories into them, regardless of how true they were or were not.
Right.
So, but yeah, I love that you can find the humor in that. Now, all these years later, so can I. At the time, it was not funny.
Of course not. It's you know, the hindsight is always the best. And we always laugh at the craziest parts of our life as we get older. And we're like, gosh, I was really into that drama, but now it's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, now it's entertaining drama. Before it was like, oh my goodness, pull my hair out, you know?
Right.
Yeah. You know, there's this story, and I believe it comes from Nietzsche. And he talks about, basically he's talking about human development through the story of a camel, a lion, and a child. Have you ever heard about this? Does it ring any bells for you?
No.
Okay, do you mind if I share it real quick?
Please, yeah.
Okay, good, because it plays into my own story. So you have this idea of a camel, and the camel is the first stage of development, and it's also equivalent to the village when we're talking about the hero's journey. And the camel is a stage at which the bulk of humanity is more or less comfortable staying in for all time. So you could say maybe 80 to 90% of the population in this world is content to be a camel for most of their life, and that's perfectly fine. The camel is all about receiving information. The camel assimilates information just like water. It takes it in, it swallows it, it holds it. And it receives this information from its family. It receives its information from its educational systems, from its political systems, belief systems, all these different, the media, all these different areas of influence. The camel takes it all in, kind of just believes it all for the most part, and that's perfectly fine with it because it's got these big old humps. It can hold all this water, no problem. The camel is also very docile and easy to train because it accepts anything, you know? And so the camel is equivalent to the village, and this is where we all start out on some level. The problem is that some of us don't make great camels for long, and this is essentially what happened to me. And as the camel develops into something else, it shapeshifts. It evolves into a different animal entirely, and that's the lion. Now, the lion is fascinating because the lion is the antithesis to the camel. The lion recognizes that all of this information that it's holding, all that water that it's holding, none of it was in fact its own. Its self-identity, everything that it has believed to be true, was in fact more or less imposed upon it. And the lion recognizes this. The lion essentially represents self-awareness, you know, the beginning kernel of coming into self-awareness. But that self-awareness hurts at first. That self-awareness is actually, it leads to rage. And that's really what the lion represents, is this deep-seated rage as it comes to understand that it, after all these years, has yet to come to understand any part of itself because it's so buried under what everyone else expects and thinks and believes. So the camel period is extremely destructive. The camel just tears everything to shreds. You know, and that's essentially, in my own way, what I was doing as I was studying my way out of Christianity. You know, it was all about this isn't true and that can't be true, and it was all about what was not correct and really tearing apart all of these things. And it's vastly important. You know, I'm using the word destructive, and it has this a semantic assumption connected to it of being negative. In fact, it's a really powerful process as all of these layers of what is not true for us get torn apart, and really what the lion is seeking to penetrate to is the truth, its own truth. It's trying to find itself underneath all of these layers. There's a side story about the lion. The side story is that the lion has to attack a dragon, and in order to defeat the dragon, it has to rip off every one of its scales one by one. You know, and that's essentially the process that I was engaged in for the beginning part of my adult experience, just going back into all of these things that I thought were true, essentially proving to myself that they were not, so that I could clean the slate. Right? It was a very backwards journey. Now there's a trick with the lion, and that's that many of the people who proceed to this position of the lion, this inner rage against the machine, so to speak, many of them get stuck there. It's very easy to become stuck there because anywhere you turn your attention, everything's going wrong. You know, anywhere you turn your attention, there are influences. And so it's easy to become stuck in the position of the lion. But the true potential of this stage is actually pointing to another shapeshift, another transition. And what happens in this story is that the lion, once it's removed all of those scales and defeated the dragon, the lion transforms into the child. And this is such a beautiful image. The child, this pure, innocent beginning state, the beginner's mind, whereby all of experience is a playground. You know, there's nothing to accept or deny. There's nothing to fight against. We're no longer at war with the world or with ourselves. This child state is playful. It's honestly just about being filled with wonder, right? It's all about curiosity and this playful engagement with our experience. So it's a rather interesting story for me. It's been with me ever since I was, 19. And I even used to keep a figurine that I had found of a camel and a figurine that I had found of a lion as representations of this story, so I could constantly remember the transition that was occurring. And in all of that time, I've never yet found a figurine of a child that wanted to join that group. So I don't know if that's telling me something, but I have yet to find the child. Yeah.
The child will come at the perfect time. I would imagine the universe is going to give you that. And you're going to be like, yeah, that's it.
Yes, it'll be perfect timing. The truth is that my experience has superseded, in some ways, my search for a figurine, which is to say that in so many ways, that tension and that rage, that fighting with all of these things has softened, and in most cases completely disappeared. And that's the real triumph of this story. And it is also the answer to your question about how things kind of came back together in terms of my relationship with my family. You know, it was at basically the exact time that I was able to release a lot of these old stories about having disappointed my family, about them having disappointed me by raising me in ways that I would never raise a child, all these different things, these things that I had built up and attacked. You know, when that all disappeared and all that was left was this pulse of natural loving kindness towards these people who had only ever been, you know, generous and loving towards me, really, everything changed. As my relationship from within changed, my relationship to them from within changed, then, you know, the way that they related to me changed. And it wasn't anything that anyone did on purpose. You know, when it finally began to come back together, the quality of our connection had deepened to such a great extent, and I hadn't done anything. On the surface, that's what it appeared like, as if I hadn't done anything. Yet inside, of course, I had traveled whole universes in order to achieve this position of simply being accepting of this world that I inhabited and of myself within that world. So now, of course, it's a totally different experience. In fact, one of the exciting things that I've done with them more recently is I helped them to open an ukulele shop of their own. So now, as a part of my own being, simply who I am, enjoying very simply this beauty of who I am. From that has sprung an opportunity to serve them now in a whole new way and to bring them into the playful quality of what lights them up. And so now there's the Ukebug. You know, the Ukebug now exists as a result of this renewed connection. And that has all served to further the connection. I mean, there's this, it's kind of like in any direction we go, there's a way that this snowballs. And the process of orienting ourselves appropriately, orienting ourselves in such a way that snowball is not, you know, an unpleasant one. So that's kind of the whole trick. So I'll pause there.
There's so many people out there who are having issues with accepting parts of themselves, or even accepting parts of other people out there in their relationships and that sort of thing, which, you know, all comes back to our own self within. So what are some tools, techniques, what are some things, or what are some really deep things that you've done to, you know, work through those for yourself, and so that it totally transformed your relationship with everything else on the outside? I mean, because I think what most people don't really realize, like you said, 80% of the people population out there, is that if you don't do any inner work, everything's going to stay pretty much the same, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So what type of inner work have you done to help yourself?
So that's a great question. And there's a lot of answers to it. Right. I'm sure this is true for you, that, you know, in this process of seeking what will work for any given one of us, you know, we go through all sorts of different things and experiences. The first thing that I would love to point out is that we can think in terms of dimensions here. We can think in terms of two primary dimensions, and you have the external dimension, in which the world around us simply moves. You know, there's all sorts of things happening outside of us that we have zero control over. And so from this perspective, this dimension of experience is completely out of control. It's chaos. There's nothing that we can do to change those things. I can't change how you choose or act or think. It's not my responsibility. And even if I wanted to make it my responsibility, I would fail, right? To a certain extent. I mean, there are ways that we have of manipulating our world to trick us into thinking that we have control, but truly what's outside of our being exists as its own story. And so it's out of control. However, what's inside of this sphere of our own being is a different story altogether. And inside, we have a lot of control, especially in here, especially on the level of our mindset and how we are relating to the world or making sense of the world. So to answer your question, of course, I had to learn to retract my attention, to take it away from trying to like fix and manipulate and shuffle all of these external pieces, which the minute I'd get them into place, off they went somewhere else. I had to recognize at some point that was not only futile, but that it was causing harm to me, and to those pieces that I was attempting to manipulate. And I had to bring the focus inward, just like you say. And so when you begin to recognize that this inner world has a certain amount of, I guess you have a certain amount of control. Now you have a new variable being entered into the equation, the variable of choice. I can choose to look at things differently. I can choose to act differently. And once you have really gotten a hold of what that means, then you can begin to explore
how powerful you are, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you hear people talking about us basically evolving or ascending to these positions of almost godlike creative capacity. And at least on a metaphorical level, they're not far off. The extent to which we have control is vast, just as the extent to which we have no control is vast. This whole question of like free will, it's a both and answer to that question. We live in a world that is motivated by subjective experience, by the subjective world of free will, and yet we're engaging in a world that supersedes that somehow. And so this is a really interesting dichotomy to witness and to experience. But to begin to experience it from the inside, that changes everything. So for myself, the first step was really just in becoming aware of what that inside looks like. It was self-awareness. A tool that was extremely useful for me early on, we're going back 7 or almost 8 years now at this point, was a system known as human design. Have you ever heard of the human design system?
No, I haven't.
Okay. The human design system is, in my humble opinion, actually probably the most powerful and important single system for the modern human. It was a huge gold mine when I found human design, but it's also extremely technical, extremely complex, and it's talk about rabbit holes. It's very easy to get lost in that world of human design. And even though it's based on a very scientific foundation, all these years since its introduction, you can imagine how many of its adherents have essentially made it some version of like a religion. And so a lot of the initial quality, which was extremely functional and applicable, has been lost to, superficial debate.
Right.
So, anyone who's hearing this human design system and frantically typing it into Google, beware of what you find. It's just like anything else. What exists at the core of this system is probably the most important and impactful system that I've ever engaged in, and I've engaged in a lot. So human design was really useful for me because it allowed me to get a view of myself that was remarkably precise. Really what I was looking at through the human design system was an imprint of my internal structure. I could look at a visual imprint of my internal structure, and I could go deeper and deeper and deeper into all of the lessons that imprint illuminated, and learn about myself in a very new sort of way, in a way that truly invited me into experience. Because this particular system is not designed to be believed in. It's based on a whole litany of ancient and contemporary sciences. It's very scientific. And so the point is, here's a picture. Here's what it means. Go play. Go see if what it's showing you is true. Go see if what it's showing you has any true benefit for you. And so for me, meeting this system was a really big step. And I actually continue to be involved with the human design system in a very real way now as well. But that was the first piece, self-awareness, finding these different ways to come into an understanding of ourselves. And the next step, the one that took several more years for me, was to take all of that self-awareness, which is happening in many cases at first on an intellectual or conceptual level, right? We're basically formulating new ideas about ourselves. And a lot of that happens up here in the conceptual sphere, in this cloud of ideas and theories, it's very easy to get stuck in that cloud. And I was there studying like a fiend for many years. And it wasn't until I was able to take a lot of those beautiful ideas down into my body. It wasn't until I began to learn what it meant to embody the very ideas and theories that I had been otherwise really just kind of playing with on the level of my mind. When I was able to bring them down into my body, everything began to change, because now we were truly testing the subjective value of those ideas. What I found is that there are many, many beautiful ideas that I resonate powerfully to on the level of the mind, but there are only certain ideas that are perfect for me to live inside of. That's rather interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I'm curious to know, if we pause here, is this something that connects to you personally, out of curiosity?
Yeah, for me, my journey was, reading a lot of spiritual, tons of different types of spiritual books, going to different types of spiritual events and workshops and that sort of thing. But until I started experiencing things on my own and meditating and going within and looking at myself and doing, some of that work like Byron Katie, that sort of thing, looking at my pain.
Love Byron Katie.
Yeah, looking at those things, experiencing things in my body, then things started coming together better, for sure.
Okay. Yes. So for me, that was a huge missing link.
But I think in the beginning, it's all in here in our mind. You're right.
It is.
It's like we're taking things in. Mm-hmm.
It's perfectly normal. It is a huge part of how we've been more or less trained to engage with our world. I mean, especially the modern world. I mean, talk about the way that this even technology drives us outside of ourselves. We're constantly becoming alienated from what is real. We're not necessarily grounded beings in the same way that we were maybe when we were barefoot Native American Indians running around the woods. Mm-hmm. And yet something in me ever since childhood has always been deeply connected to that image, to this sensory connection with the earth, and a sensory connection as well to others and to the experience of my world. And so it was probably only, an inevitable matter of time before I essentially exhausted myself intellectually and had to look deeper. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, deeper for me ended up being the body. It was all about bringing these things into the body, into experience, and seeing how they felt. Almost like clothing, And some of the things felt wonderful and helpful, and I was transformed as a result of bringing them into the reality of my everyday experience. And other things were like, all right, well, I guess that's not for me. I'll move on. Mm-hmm. But what it opened the door for was this extremely scientific engagement with the material. It was the door of experimentation. If you think about how natural science was initially intended to work, you had a hypothesis, intellect, had an idea, and then you set about testing the idea. And the only way to do that is testing it, bringing it down into experience. And so, we're here to fill the beakers of our experience with all sorts of test formulas so that we can determine what really is going to combine, what's going to coalesce into this perfect ocean, mm-hmm. For each of us as individuals. And what I found through that was that, man, the process was significantly more personal than I expected it to be. Mm-hmm. Another thing we're led to believe is that there are magic pills out there, that if you believe this thing or do this thing or go to this retreat, you'll have it, No. Then you've got it. It's not like that. It's not like that at all. You get a piece, and then you get another piece. Mm-hmm. And your piece is different from my piece. Right. And what connects deeply to the core of who you are, the authentic core of who you are, is different from what connects to me. And so what begins to reveal itself is the perfection of our individual uniqueness. Yeah.
And I think whatever calls to you, whatever you feel like you're drawn to, that's the thing that you should experiment with, because it's drawing you to it. It's like you're coming together as one, and there's something there for you in that experience. And for me, I just followed that, that impulse. And when I did that, I always received something in return that was just amazing.
That's amazing. See, what you're describing there is a whole new sort of personal orientation or personal guidance system. If you think about how so many of us make decisions in this life, we're making the decisions from the level of our mind. We're weighing pros and cons. We're trying to figure things out. We're trying to do it right. All these different ways that we have of intellectually engaging with our experience. As a result of this, we're always at odds with ourselves, and no matter what direction we go, it's the wrong one. Because there's always another option which remains unexplored.
Well, you got to take these two in consideration, right?
Yes, yes, correct. That connection that you just drew there is the whole trick. You know, this isn't about escaping the mind. It's not about eliminating the mind. That was a surprise for me, to be honest, because so much of my discord early on had to do with the way that I thought and my psychology and all these different things, and the fact that I was OCD. So I always connected deeply with these ideas of like kind of going to the Himalayas, finding a cave, and just sitting there for 20 years, you know, until I could escape the monkey mind. But what I found is that there's nothing to run from. Remember, this is the child. There's nothing to run from. This whole thing is a playground. And so what led me ultimately to the greatest realization of my experience, a realization which continues to expand every single day since, is the very connection that you just drew, is this illumination, this enlightenment truly of both the mind and the body, to locate that inner impulse. And it's a different feeling and a different location and a different story for every one of us, but to locate it for yourself, and then to allow the authority of your life to come from that deep-rooted, visceral location instead of the back and forth of the mind. This is totally different. Now the mind gets to engage with the experience as entertainment, you know, as a learning journey, as this juicy narrative that's continually unfolding, a mystery truly that's unraveling moment by moment, even as the physical system, all of this richness beneath the surface of our conscious grasp, as this now motivates activity and directs us truly into the perfect directions for us as individuals. Yeah.
So what you're talking about is very advanced for, you know, for people who are on the spiritual path, because many people aren't even on the path. They're just following the herd, right?
Yes.
And, but I think more and more and more people, once, you know, because there's so much out there now online, on the books. I mean, even on TV, you know, mass media. I mean, there's so much out there. You have Deepak Chopra, you have Oprah doing her Soul Sundays, and it's a lot more mainstream now. And
yes.
I think what people need to know is that it's just don't follow something for years and just stop there. Just keep learning, keep growing, keep opening up to more, because it's never ending. You know, there's just an infinite amount of love, infinite amount of peace, infinite amount of joy, of magic out there. It's just incredible.
Oh yeah, that was pure poetry, Tess. I loved that. Every word of it is true. Yeah. The words that kept running through my head are just keep going. You know, that's it. I mean, to understand that we're inside of a movement, to think of this whole experience of our lives as symphonic, that it is about this crescendo, and it is about continual movement, and that you don't get to stop at any point and be like, I did it. It's not about achievement. You know, it's about the joy, the true savory enjoyment of our experience. And that's what you're pointing to. It's super exciting stuff. And you're right. It is very advanced. It doesn't seem like it should be. And what's so fascinating about it is that it is in fact so obvious, so simple, and so familiar that we miss it.
It's so crazy, right?
To think that the piece that we're missing is knowing that we're alive as physical beings in this actual, like, lived experience. That's the missing piece. You know, we're up here running around all these different areas, and the fact is that we've removed ourselves from the most basic foundation of our existence. Is, I mean, it's rather hilarious. You know?
Yeah, I totally get it. We get, you know, we get stuck in the material world, you know, as they say, and shiny objects everywhere, and get addicted to things, and, you know, then you get kind of lost, you know, in the jungle, per se.
Yes. What's interesting is that the process is multi-directional. In other words, we're becoming lighter. We're ascending through these layers of spirituality. So everything that you're hearing from these spiritual masters and from these spiritual conversations is accurate, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not the end of the story, because as this ascension is occurring, so is this depth, so is this deepening. It's like a tree. The deeper the roots, the greater the foliage. And this is what needs to happen in order for any of us to survive truly as individuals, as ourselves. You can't have just the roots. You can't have just the expression. You need to have both in order to have something that really stands against the storms of all that chaos outside, right? Mm-hmm. I also find it very exciting to think in terms of paths. You know, you named off a bunch of them, and the reality is it goes on and on. I mean, there are so many paths, as many paths as there are people. And the beauty is that there are no wrong paths. The only wrong choice is to stop on the path. It's about continuing on the path. An image that I held early on and continue to hold to this day is I have a room full of people. And in this room, I mean, massive room full of people. And inside of this room is a huge sphere, a ball, right? And there's this big glowing ball. And everyone in the room has found a seat. And everyone in the room from their position is looking at this three-dimensional object and saying, hey, look at the circle. That golden circle is the truth. You know, and I always imagined, you know, my parents sitting in the room. And I always imagined all these different people that I came into contact with sitting down and looking at this ball and saying, that's the truth. And that was a Muslim saying that. And that's the truth. And that was, you know, whatever. You have all these different perspectives. And what they see is a face, a single facet of something that is infinite, right? And I always wanted to be the guy who got up and walked around the room. You know, I wanted to be the one stepping over all the people who hadn't yet figured that this was more than it appeared to be. And that's truly what we're dealing with here. And then to step one more, like, mind-blowing step beyond that, and to recognize that you can actually step right inside of that ball and that it's been you all along. Now that's the thing that really changes everything.
Exactly. Yeah, you are one with all that is. What do you think about different dimensions and different realities and, you know, multi-dimensional selves? I'm going deep now.
I love that you would think to ask me that question. There's something about me that's like, I think this guy's weird enough that he might have some thoughts about that. Yeah, I mean, we could talk about other dimensions and aliens and all sorts of stuff for days. The reality is that as a result of this pursuit and the way that I've gone about it, there are very little directions to which I'm closed off. You know, the directions I'm closed off to are usually directions that involve some variation on rigidity. So when we're looking at something like multiple dimensions, parallel universes, if you think in terms of ascension and you're talking about multiple densities, you know, like, oh, we're existing in the third density and transitioning to the fourth. There's so many amazing theories out there. And even if they only are true on the level of theory, even if they're just completely made up, the reality is that they serve a very powerful purpose, which is to expand the possibility of what we believe. It's to expand possibilities. And so, yes, I believe in all that stuff. You know, I'm super weird in that way. It makes a whole lot of sense to me that that the way that I experience the world, that my perspective is so much smaller than what is possible. Right. And I've seen this play out in so many different ways that at this point it's more about just kind of like leaning back and getting curious and be like, okay, and now what's the next surprise? Because it's coming, you know. And
that deja vu feeling, right? I get that quite a bit. I'm like, am I experiencing the exact same thing somewhere else, or did I experience this like 100 years ago? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, past lives, the idea of time as non-linear. I mean, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating stuff. And really, if these sort of questions are the sort of questions that pull us forward, are the kind of questions that kind of like open the gates of our chest and allow that heart to grow, then they're perfect. They're perfect. And if they allow us to come into a more sensational contact with our experience, then they must be explored, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, my question for you is, can you put a finer point on the question? Is there maybe something that you've been considering recently that you'd like to explore along those lines?
Well, I had a vision when I was meditating that, and there was some kind of challenge going on that I was working through, but at the end of the meditation, I saw myself as a, small child, just slowly like getting taller and taller and taller till I am who I am now, and just embracing every single part of that, every single part of myself. Like I could see all of myself throughout this lifetime and just like embracing it and loving it through everything. And I thought that was just so cool.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And the effect that has.
Mm-hmm.
Someone hearing that story without any real awareness of these topics that we've been exploring today would be like, so what? So, so you had a random daydream about, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Not so. Someone like yourself who truly enters into an experience like that is healing. You're healing yourself. Right. And by virtue of healing yourself, you're healing everyone around you. It's amazing how this, the relational context, the dynamics of this quantum reality that we live in, the effect that something like that can have is truly remarkable. And it reminds me as well, we had mentioned potentially at some point coming into short discussion on WholeSystem human, but this wraps in really well to a brief description of the pillars, the foundational pillars that support the methodology that I've created, because we've been discussing them all along. The first of these pillars is known as body listening, and it's all about sensing ourselves from the inside out, coming into our bodies in such a way that we can really ground this whole exploration on the level of experience, not just theory. And then the second pillar is something that I refer to as narrative design. And narrative design is in such a powerful and direct way, precisely what you just described. This ability to recognize the quality of the stories that we're telling about ourselves and about the world. And then, again, beyond the point of self-awareness is this capacity to make new choices, to tell better stories. And that's what you did, because I'll bet you that for many, many years prior to that experience for you, your relationship to all of those beautiful characters who make up you was probably different, maybe more critical, So for you to step into that story, that has a direct effect on so many more levels of your being than any scientist or doctor could put a finger on. I am confident that allows you to release traumas that were being held in your musculature, in your posture, in the nervous system, in the water of your cells. It's amazing the depths with which these sort of imaginative experiences can really reach if we know what we're doing. If we apply these mechanisms on purpose. Earlier on, you asked me about the tools. I basically took all the tools that I'd ever assembled over the course of more than a dozen years, and then I consolidated it all into 3. Body listening, narrative design, and that third pillar that I haven't told you about is one that I refer to as wayfinding. And it's all about that inner orientation, about orienting ourselves towards possibility as opposed to orienting ourselves, the way that we're usually set to be oriented, which is towards stuckness, tension, worry.
Well, we have we have a way of like creating. It's kind of like Groundhog Day. All we know is the past, right? We get up, we stretch, we go brush our teeth, have our coffee, go to work, get lunch, get back in the car, come back home, have dinner, kind of forget all the other things that are going on around it. And we just kind of create that day after day, day after day. Yeah. Instead of really going within and creating new possibilities, like it sounds like what you created. So is that what does that involve when you're talking about creating new possibilities by going within? Is that part of it meditating, or is it something else? Or
beautiful question. And the response is that it's different for every single individual who engages it.
Great.
Which on the one hand makes it impossibly complex, because there's there's no part of me at any given point that is like, this is what you must do. The whole thing is an exploration. It's truly an adventure, and it's the greatest adventure, you know? So for some people, this quality of coming into a moment of mindful meditation is just fertile with meaning. And for other people, it will never be correct. You know, some people need to sit quietly. Some people need to go for a walk. Some people need to, you know, dance like a crazy person. The point is, and this is the value of this whole investigation, really, the value is that you get to go find it for yourself. And to have, in this case, a helping hand from someone like me, or I imagine like yourself, who can guide, who's like, hey, look, this is some fascinating territory, and you don't actually have to be completely alone, at least not in the exploration of it. You know, anyone who I work with is going to be alone in that what they find will be perfectly suited to them and different from anything that I've ever seen before. But the process of finding it can be collaborative.
Right, right. So I love that the system that you created is so open-ended. So whereas you don't have to follow this technique, or you don't have to follow these tools, you're like going in and creating that for yourself, finding out what's going to work best for you, because we all have the answers within ourselves to begin with.
Yes.
You just have to be guided to that point, right?
Yes, you know, that's exactly right. That's why I refer to this as an adaptive methodology. It's tricky when I start using a bunch of big words, it starts to sound impressive and confusing. But the point of referring to it as adaptive is essentially that. It's basically respecting individuality. It's this understanding that we don't get to diagnose problems and then prescribe solutions. Life isn't that simple. Thank goodness. How boring would that be?
Right.
There is no magic pill. This is about the hero's journey. It's about the adventure of finding specifically what it means to show up fully and fearlessly as ourselves.
There's many people who go on 100-mile ultra marathon runs through the mountains, and they have a hero's journey. Well, to me, I'd be like, no, you know, I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do it. Yeah.
It's so funny. I often talk about my younger brother, next youngest down. He's such a daredevil. You know, when we were younger and we were all riding our bikes, he was the one doing tricks, popping wheelies and jumping. And I was the one who was like, you know, hands on the brakes, very careful and cautious. And, you know, he was the one skateboarding. And if you ever saw me on a skateboard, I mean, you just would never see me on a skateboard. Maybe I was crouched. I don't know.
Me either, yeah.
You know, I just was never the daredevil in that way. But when it came to the inner experience, when it came to the way in which I engaged life, oh man, you know, the way in which that capacity exceeded anyone else that I'd ever met, you know, hey, I am my own version of a daredevil. And this journey is its own version of mythology. And we each get to engage with that in a very special, personal sort of way. And it's a very exciting thing.
And it's something that takes a lot of courage, because there's so many people who are avoiding those feelings, avoiding those places that they think are so scary with distractions out here in the outer world. And but the moment that you decide to step within, it's a little scary at first, but once you get in there, there's just so many wonderful gifts there. There's so many wonderful feelings and emotions, and beyond emotions. It's just magical. So highly recommend that you take that journey. And how exactly can people get a hold of you, Timothy? How can they get a hold of you, and what is the process? And, you know, if you can go over that a little bit so that people can get started.
Oh, sure thing. Thank you. First of all, I want to say you've used the word magic and magical a couple of times, and I really love that. We are dealing with magic here, real life magic. Now, to answer your question, WholeSystemHuman.com. WholeSystemHuman.com is the primary face of the work that I do. It's also, it's kind of an experience unlike any that you've probably ever seen. I wrote and designed the website myself. It's something that a friend of mine refers to as my, oh shoot, it's escaped me. My embodied dissertation. You know, it's kind of like an interactive book. Okay? There's a lot of material on the website, and the point of that is basically anyone paying close attention can get into this for themselves without ever having to hire me. And that's on purpose.
Okay.
I built the entire whole system human methodology on the foundational basis of generosity. I want to give this away. Okay. So please, to anyone listening, watching, go make the most of WholeSystemHuman.com. Even if you never connect with me personally, this is my gift. There's a number of email subscription options on there. Each of those contains all sorts of gifts, which I'm continually developing, including an audio training course, which I'm partway through and delivering as I go. So there's a lot of goodies on that. And then to connect with me personally, there are options to schedule a free talk, 45-minute conversation. There are options to email me, anything you need to do to get in touch. And then there's the option to link out to Facebook. So the other way to get a hold of me is through Facebook. My profile at this point is public. So I invite anyone to connect with me on Facebook, because the Whole System Human page on Facebook is another location where I'm continually delivering a ton of really high quality content. Okay. Like really dense material that can really be made use of. I've only recently begun video to just level up the whole experience. And then most recently on my personal profile, I have begun to share a whole new offering that I refer to as mirror sessions. And mirror sessions is my way of making the human design system accessible to a wider audience. We talked earlier about how important I believe the system to be, and the true depth in terms of precision and individual understanding that can be, I guess, mined by this system. So mirror sessions are all about providing access to this information for anyone who's interested in it. So that's offered currently through Facebook. I haven't brought it onto any of my websites. And mirror sessions incorporates the human design system as well as body listening to provide a very practical engagement with the material that we uncover. So it's a course of discovery, and then it's a course of application. And that's what makes it really special, because at least to my knowledge, there really isn't anyone else combining those two worlds in the way that we've been talking about this whole time.
And I'm sure this goes much deeper than seeing a counselor or a psychologist or any of those avenues. Not to say those are wrong or bad or anything like that, but if you're looking to go, I mean, very deep into the aspects of healing yourself and finding out your true essence of who you are, it goes beyond that. And I believe that's where you are, and that's your journey, and that's why you're here on this earth.
Thank you so much. You're totally right. Really, this work precedes the sort of work that you could expect from a psychologist or a therapist. Just like modern medicine, there's a way that we have of looking at a problem and then trying to do surgery on the problem. And that's often what happens, you know, in these doctors' offices.
Well, you're putting a label on somebody, right?
Correct, yes. And then worse off, medicating it. I mean, so many of us have our superpowers being medicated away. It's the most remarkable and devastating thing ever. What you're describing in the work that I do is, you're correct. It's going to the root. It's preceding all of that stuff. It's finding what exists there. And the most exciting part is that it's tapping into the natural, authentic essence of what it means to show up as yourself. And so you get to bypass, and that's the wrong word, because there is a thing about spiritual bypassing, which is actually quite harmful. But you kind of get to accelerate the process of becoming what is most natural for yourself when you're not constantly picking away, in this case, at like all the different scales of the dragon. You know, there are tricks to slaying that dragon, and that's essentially what we explore through my work. Awesome.
Awesome. So do you have your ukulele laying around anywhere?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear something that would kind of end out our session here and get people, you know, kind of in that mood of party time.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll see what I can do. I got to tune up. Hang on a sec.
All right. No problem.
You know, if my parents watch this, it'll be their favorite part.
Oh, awesome. Does everybody play in your family?
They do now. Yeah. My parents started out with a pair of ukuleles, one for my mom and one for my dad. And that pair of ukuleles bred, you know. by the time 6 months had gone by, man, the house was just full of them. They had an ukulele in the kitchen. They had another 7 in the living room. They had 2 in their bedroom, and they had 1 in the bathroom.
Oh my goodness!
Which they referred to as a Poo Uke. So, yeah, that is especially for them. They're going to love that I shared that with the world. Here's a silly little tune for you. The thing is, I actually don't play songs. I fiddle. So
that's the best way. You're just like playing with the moment.
That's correct. The ukulele is so fun for me because, you know, you're a musician. I was a very serious musician early on. I was a guitarist, and my connection to the guitar was songwriting, and it was very serious stuff, and I was going to make a living doing it. And the ukulele it's a little friend, you know. I almost want to say it's a toy, but I don't want to take away from how seriously beautiful and joyful this instrument is as a real instrument. So it speaks, and the language that it speaks is playfulness, you know. Okay, here we go. There's a little ditty for you. That's
awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's amazing.
My pleasure. That was fun. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, yeah. So
you are the first time I've ever played ukulele on a podcast. So
I think that's what makes this podcast so cool. It's like it's positive out loud. So any music's going to be, I mean, most music's going to be positive. So it's going to touch the heart, open up the heart, and that's what we want in life, you know?
Yes. And if you don't mind my saying so, this is for yeah, I just have to say, man, your energy, your heart, the way that you are just radiating calm and enjoyment is, it's contagious. So, you know, I spent some time watching through some of your previous conversations. Obviously, we've been connected through Positive Out Loud and on Facebook for some time now. And everything about what you're creating and who you are is just absolutely gorgeous. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, because it matters.
It does matter. And I'm doing just like you. I'm doing this all for free. There's nothing that there's no monetary gain here. I'm doing it because I love it. I love talking to people with the energy such as yourself, who are here to uplift this world, who are here to help people get to know who they really are. So that's why I do it. And thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you for doing what you do, being who you are, and being open to the infinite possibilities of love and joy and magic.
Yes. I will very much enjoy taking that forward into my night.
All right. All right, Timothy, you have an awesome night, and we will keep in touch, and maybe we'll get on Facebook and do a live and go from there. But what I'll do is I'll put Timothy's links below as well on YouTube. So if you want to get in touch with him, talk to him on Facebook or get in touch with him from his website and get all those freebies, which I highly recommend. Go ahead and do that. And everybody, take care. We love you, and keep exploring.
Yay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Tess.